The Battle of Langemarck from 16 to 18 August 1917 was the second Allied general attack of the Third Battle of Ypres during the First World War. The battle took place near Ypres in Belgian Flanders on the Western Front, and the main British gain of ground occurred near Langemarck. The Allied attack succeeded in the north, from Langemarck to Drie Grachten, but early advances in the south on the Gheluvelt Plateau were forced back by powerful German counterattacks. Both sides were hampered by rain, which had a greater effect on the British, who occupied lower-lying areas and advanced onto ground which had been frequently and severely bombarded. The effect of the battle, the August weather, and the successful but costly German defense of the Gheluvelt Plateau during the rest of August, when the British made several attempts to advance along the plateau, led the British to revise further the methods and main offensive effort, which led to the three big British successes of 20th and 26th of September and the 4th of October. Background. Strategic background. Artillery preparation for the Second Offensive Battle of Verdun in support of the Allied offensive in Flanders, which had been delayed from mid-July, began on an 18-kilometer the 11th of August. Mortom and Hill 304 were recaptured on the 20th of August and 10,000 prisoners taken. The German army was not able to counter-attack the French, because the Eingriff divisions had been sent to Flanders. Fighting at Verdun continued into September, adding to the pressure on the German army. The Battle of Hill 70, on the outskirts of Lens on the British First Army front, was fought by the Canadian Corps. The attack was costly but inflicted great losses on 5 German divisions and pinned down troops reserved for reliefs of tired divisions on the Flanders front. The British strategy of forcing the German army to defend the Ypres salient for the protection of the Belgian coast and submarine bases at Bruges had succeeded. The French and Russian armies could make local attacks at Verdun and during the Kerensky offensive, but still needed time to recuperate and were vulnerable to large German attacks. The British offensive at Ypres drew German divisions away from the French and Russian armies and forced the Germans into a costly defense of Flanders. In Belgium, the Fifth Army had managed to advance little further towards Passchendaele since the 31st of July, due to the tenacity of the German defense and the unusually wet weather. General Hubert Goff, commander of the Fifth Army, wished for a minimum of delay in resuming the offensive, because of the effect that delay would have on Operation Hush on the coast, which needed a high tides due at the end of August. Tactical developments. In July 1917, Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig began the Third Battle of Ypres campaign, in an attempt to inflict unsustainable losses on the German army and to advance out of the Ypres salient to capture the Belgian coast. At the Battle of Messines Ridge, the ridge had been captured down to the Oosterveen line, and a substantial success had been gained in the subsequent Battle of Pilkem Ridge from the 31st of July to the 2nd of August. Ground conditions during the battles of Ypres campaign were poor, as the surface had been bombarded, fought over and partially flooded, at times severely so. Shelling had destroyed drainage canals in the area, and unseasonable heavy rain in August turned some parts into morasses of mud and waterlogged shell craters. Supply troops walked to the front on duckboards laid across the mud, often carrying loads of up to 45 kilograms. It was possible for soldiers to slip off the path into the craters and drown. Trees were reduced to blunted trunks, the branches and leaves torn away. Bodies of men buried earlier were uncovered by the rain and shelling. The ground was powdery to a depth of 9 meters and when wet had the consistency of porridge. The ground dried quickly, except where water was held in shell holes, and after a few dry days became dusty. Prelude. British offensive preparations. Brigadier General J. H. Davidson intervened again on the 1st of August with a memorandum urging caution on Hague and Gap. Davidson recommended that the preliminary operation by Second Corps not be hurried. A full artillery preparation and relief of the divisions already engaged should be completed before the operation, as tired and depleted units had often failed in attacks in the past. 2 or 3 clear days were needed for accurate artillery fire, especially as captured ground on the Gheluvelt Plateau gave better observation and German maps revealed the positions of German machine gun emplacements, which being small and concealed, would need precise shooting by the artillery to destroy. Capture of the Black Line from Inverness Copse north to Westhoek would be insufficient to cover an advance from the Steenbeek further north, and large German counter-attacks could be expected on the plateau, given that its retention was fundamental to the German defensive scheme. 2 more divisions were sent to Second Corps as a reinforcement. Few of the pillboxes captured on the 31st of July had been damaged by artillery fire, and before the attack, the 109th Brigade Commander Brigadier General Ricardo arranged 3-minute bombardments on selected pillboxes and blockhouses by the 19th Corps Heavy Artillery, with pauses so that the artillery observers could make corrections to contradictory maps and photographs. It was discovered that on many of the targets, the shell dispersion covered hundreds of yards, as did wire-cutting bombardments. On the 2nd of August, at the suggestion of Brigadier General Hugh Wells, commander of the Tank Corps, it was decided that the surviving tanks were to be held back due to the weather, to ensure that they could be used in mass later on, although some were used in late August. The preliminary operation intended for the 2nd of August was delayed by rain until the 10th of August, and the general offensive was postponed from 4 to 16 August. The 20th Division had been in 14th Corps Reserve for the opening attack on the 31st of July and replaced the 38th Division on the 5th of August. The 7th Battalion of the Somerset Light Infantry took over captured German trenches behind the front line on the 5th of August, which had been made the British reserve line, and lost 3 men to shell fire while waiting for dark. On arrival at the support line 500 yards forward and the front line another 500 yards beyond, the battalion found that the front line was several shell hole posts with muddy bottoms, strung along the Steenbeek from the Langemarck Road to the Ypres-Steden Railway. British artillery was engaged in destructive bombardments of the German positions opposite, and German artillery fire was aimed at the British infantry concentrating for the next attack. After heavy rain all night, the battalion spent the 6th of August soaked through and had 20 casualties, 2 men being killed. On the 7th of August there were 35 casualties, 12 being killed before the battalion was relieved until the 14th of August. Training began for the next attack and planning began using trench maps and aerial photographs. Each company formed 3 platoons, 2 for the advance, with 2 rifle sections in the lead and the Lewis gun sections behind, and the 3rd platoon to mop up. Training emphasized the need for units not held up by German resistance to hug the creeping barrage and form offensive flanks, to assist troops who had been halted by German resistance by providing enfilade fire and enveloping German positions, which were to be left to reserve platoons. Every known German position was allocated to a unit of the approximately 470 men left in the battalion, to reduce the risk of German positions going unnoticed and firing at the leading troops from behind. While the Somersets were out of the line, the 10th and 11th Battalions of the Rifle Brigade edged forward about 100 yards beyond the Steenbeek, which cost the 10th Battalion 215 casualties. An attempt on the 15th of August to recapture the Aubongie blockhouse 300 yards beyond the Steenbeek which had been lost to a German counter-attack on the 31st of July, fail. It was decided that the infantry for the general attack due on the 16th of August would have to squeeze into the ground beyond the river in front of the blockhouse for the attack on Langemarck. Operation Summernacht, the 5th of August. Operation Summernacht was a local German attack near Gheluvelt, which began at 5:20 a.m. on the 5th of August. After a short bombardment, 3 companies of I Battalion, Infantry Regiment 62 captured a ridge 1 kilometer northeast of Gheluvelt, surprising the British, who fell back 80 meters. The new German positions were on higher and drier ground, which deprived the British of observation over the German rear and reduced casualties from British artillery fire. Further to the south, Reserve Infantry Regiments 209 and 213 of the 207th Division attacked Gheluvelt through thick fog and captured the village, despite many casualties, and took at least 300 prisoners. Most of the British had occupied captured pillboxes and blockhouses, which had to be attacked one by one, and at 5:45 a.m. 3 signal flares were fired to indicate success. The Germans later abandoned Gheluvelt and reoccupied the old line. Then the Germans withdrew to the start line. Because of the severity of British counter-attacks and artillery fire, Operation Summernacht left the front line ragged, with the gap between Regiments 209 and 213, which the British tried to penetrate in the days before the bigger local attack of the 10th of August. Capture of Westhoek's 2nd Corps attacked on the 10th of August to take the part of the Black Line held by the Germans on the 31st of July. British artillery fire was distributed across the battlefront for the general attack due later by the 5th and 1st French armies, to the Green Line of the 31st of July. German artillery fire was concentrated on the 2nd and 19th Corps fronts. British counter-battery efforts were hampered by the adverse weather, which made air observation extremely difficult. Much of the British counter-battery effort was wasted, because the British were unable to see German artillery shifting position and often bombarded empty emplacements. The state of the ground, German artillery fire and British artillery losses foreshadowed the situation in late October opposite Passchendaele Ridge. The 8th and 30th Divisions had been relieved by 25th and 18th Divisions by the 4th of August, but postponements caused by rain and the relief of frontline troops every 48 hours had exhausted all of the battalions by the 10th of August. On the 10th of August, an attack by the 24th Division on Lower Star Post failed, after German sentries caught sight of the British troops assembling in moonlight. The principal advance was made by the 18th Division in the center and succeeded quickly, but German artillery began an SOS barrage at 6:00 a.m. from Stirling Castle to Westhoek. The German barrage isolated the foremost infantry beyond Inverness Copse and in Glencorse Wood. His local German reserves began immediate counterattacks. Around 7:00 p.m., German infantry advanced behind a smokescreen and recaptured the copse and all but the northwest corner of Glencorse Wood. The 74th Brigade of the 25th Division advanced at 4:25 a.m., fast enough to evade the German barrage on the British front line and reached its objectives by 5:30 a.m., assisted by the firepower of 5 Royal Field Artillery brigades. The German garrison in Westhoek was rushed, while on the right flank, sniping and attacks by German aircraft caused considerable casualties during the day. The division held its gains around Westhoek but lost 158 men killed, 1,033 wounded and more than 100 missing. The difficulties encountered by the 18th Division in Glencorse Wood on the right, as it was pushed back towards its start line, allowed German snipers and machine gunners to obstruct consolidation in the 25th Division area, particularly on the right flank, as the German troops reoccupied positions lost earlier in the day. Lieutenant General Claude Jacob, the 2nd Corps commander, argued for a delay in the general offensive to complete the advance on the Gheluvelt Plateau, particularly by gaining superiority over the German artillery behind the plateau and repairing tracks through the woods, to allow the replenishment of supply dumps close to the front line. Gough was mindful of Operation Hush and only willing to postpone the offensive for a day, then for another 24 hours. After a thunderstorm late on the 14th of August, the 8th Division commander, Major General W. Henniker, had written to Jacob on the 12th of August, urging that the 56th Division should have extra artillery support for its attack and should precede the attack of the 8th Division. The ground in front of 2nd Corps sloped down from a high point on Menin Road to the Hampered Valley. Failure in the 56th Division area on the right would expose troops further north to crossfire from Inverness Copse and Glencorse Wood. The suggestion was rejected, but the 53rd Brigade from the 18th Division was attached to the 56th Division as a reinforcement. The day before the attack. Plan of attack. The attack was planned as an advance in stages, to keep the infantry well under the protection of the field artillery. 2nd Corps was to reach the Green Line of the 31st of July, an advance of about 1,350–1,500 meters, and form a defensive flank from Stirling Castle to Blackwatch Corner. The deeper objective was compensated for by reducing battalion frontages from 350 to 225 meters and leapfrogging supporting battalions through an intermediate line, to take the final objective. On the 56th Division front, the final objective was about 500 meters into Polygon Wood. On the right, the 53rd Brigade was to advance from Stirling Castle, through Inverness Copse to Blackwatch Corner, at the southwestern corner of Polygon Wood, to form a defensive flank to the south. Further north, the 169th Brigade was to advance to Polygon Wood through Glencorse Wood, and 167th Brigade was to reach the northwestern part of Polygon Wood, through Non-Boschen. The 8th Division was to attack with 2 brigades between Westhoek and the Ypres Rulers Railway, to the Green Line on the rise east of the Hampered Stame. 8 tanks were allotted to 2nd Corps to assist the infantry. The artillery support for the attack was the same as that for the 10th of August. 180 times 18-pounder guns for the creeping barrage moving at 100 meters in 5 minutes, with 72 times 4.5-inch howitzers and 36 times 18 PDRs placing standing barrages beyond the final objective. 8 machine gun companies were to fire barrages on the area from the northeast of Polygon Wood to west of Westroosebeke. 19th and 18th Corps further north were also to capture the Green Line, slightly beyond the German Wilhelm Line. Each 19th Corps division had 14 18 PDR batteries for the creeping barrage and 24 times 4.5-inch howitzer batteries and 40 machine guns for standing barrages, along with the normal heavy artillery groups. Each division also had 108 times 18 PDR and 36 times 4.5-inch howitzers for bombardment, and benefited from supply routes which had been far less heavily shelled than those further south. In the 18th Corps area, a brigade each from the 48th and 11th Divisions with 8 tanks each was to attack from the north end of St. Julian to the White House east of Langemarck. The 20th Division planned to capture Langemarck with the 60th and 61st Brigades. The 59th Brigade was to go into reserve after holding the line before the attack, less the two battalions in the front line, which were to screen the assembly of the attacking brigades. The attack was to begin on the east bank of the Westroosebeke, where the troops had 70 to 135 meters of room to assemble, crossing over on wooden bridges laid by the engineers the night before the attack. The first objective was set on a road running along the west side of Langemarck. The second objective was 500 yards further on, at the east side of the village, and the final objective was another 600 yards ahead, in the German defences beyond Westroosebeke. On the right, the 60th Brigade was to attack on a one-battalion front, with two battalions leapfrogging through the leading battalion, to reach the second and final objectives. The attack was to move northeast behind Langemarck to confront an expected German counter-attack up the road from Poelkapelle 2,000 yards away, while the 61st Brigade, attacking on a two-brigade front, took the village while shielded by the 60th Brigade. The maneuver of the 60th Brigade would also threaten the Germans in Langemarck with encirclement. Bonjit, the German blockhouse which had resisted earlier attacks, was to be dealt with separately, by infantry from one of the covering battalions and a Royal Engineer Field Company. Artillery for the attack came from the 20th and 38th Divisional Artilleries and the heavy guns of 14th Corps. A creeping barrage was to move at 90 meters in 4 minutes, and a standing barrage was to fall on the objective lines in succession, as the infantry advanced. The first objective was to be bombarded for 20 minutes as the creeping barrage moved towards it. Then the second objective was to be shelled for an hour to catch retreating German soldiers, destroy defenses and force any remaining Germans under cover. A third barrage was to come from the 14th Corps heavy artillery, sweeping back and forth with high explosive, from 300–1,500 meters ahead of the foremost British troops, to stop German machine gunners in retired positions from firing through the British barrage. Smoke shell was to be fired, to hide the attacking troops, as they reorganized at each objective. A machine gun barrage from 48 guns was arranged, with half of the guns moving forward with the infantry, to add to the infantry's firepower against German counterattacks. German troops were also to be strafed by British aircraft from low altitude. The French First Army was to extend the attack north from the Westroosebeke to Drie Grachten, aiming to reach the St. Jansbeek. German defensive preparations. The German Fourth Army operation order for the defensive battle had been issued on the 27th of June. German infantry units had been reorganized on similar lines to the British, with a rifle section, assault troop section, a grenade launcher section and a light machine gun section. Field artillery in the Eingriff divisions had been organized into artillery assault groups, which followed the infantry, to engage the attackers with observed direct fire. Each infantry regiment of the 183rd Division, based around Westroosebeke behind the northern flank of Group Ypres, had a battalion of the Divisional Field Artillery Regiment attached. On the 31st of July, the German defense in depth had begun with a front system of 3 breastworks, Iowa, Ibenici, each about 200 meters apart, garrisoned by the 4 companies of each front battalion, with listening posts in no man's land. About 2,000 meters behind these works was the Albrecht line, the rear boundary of the forward battle zone. Companies of the support battalions were placed at the back of the Kampfeld, half in the pillboxes of the Albrecht line. to provide a framework for the re-establishment of defense in depth, once the enemy attack had been repulsed. Dispersed in front of the line were divisional sharpshooter machine gun nests called the Stützpunktlinie. Much of the Kampfeld north of the Ypres-Rouliers Railway had fallen on the 31st of July. The Albrecht Line roughly corresponded to the British Black Line of the 31st of July, much of which had been captured, except on the Gheluvelt Plateau. The line marked the front of the main battle zone, which was about 2,300 meters deep, behind which was the Wilhelm Line and most of the field artillery of the front divisions. In pillboxes of the Wilhelm Line were the reserve battalions of the frontline regiments. The leading regiment of an Eingriff division was to advance into the zone of the front division, with its other two regiments moving forward in close support, from support and reserve assembly areas further back in the Flandern Stellung. Eingriff divisions were accommodated 9,000–11,000 meters behind the front line, and at the beginning of an attack, began their advance to assembly areas in the Rückwartige Kampfeld behind Flandern I, ready to intervene in the Gross Kampfeld, Verdenso Fortigen Gegenstoss. In an appreciation of the 2nd of August, Group Ypres correctly identified the Wilhelm Line as the British objective on the 31st of July and predicted more attacks on the Gheluvelt Plateau and further north towards Langemarck. In the Group Ypres area, only the 3rd and 79th Reserve Divisions remained battle-worthy, the other four having suffered c. 10,000 casualties. On the 4th of August, a Group Witchate assessment concluded that the British attack needed to make progress by forcing back the 52nd Division on the Gheluvelt Plateau, where the defensive scheme had the front regiment of each division backed by the other two regiments in support and in reserve behind the front line. Crown Prince Ruprecht expressed concern on the 5th of August that the weather conditions were rapidly exhausting the German infantry. Casualties averaged 1,500–2,000 men per division, which was lower than the 4,000 average on the Somme in 1916, but only because divisions were being relieved more frequently. Supplying troops in the front line was extremely difficult because the British were using more gas, which caught carrying parties by surprise. The 6th Bavarian Reserve Division had suffered 1,200 gas casualties.